Hello friends, welcome back to another video. If you're watching this, it means we have officially made it to the last month of 2023. We've officially made it to December, which is arguably the best month of the year. The big thing about December is a lot of creators do vlogmas. If there's something that I want to document with you guys and I want to take you along, then I'll do a vlog, probably posted the day after the event happens, but if it's just a more casual day, which most days are, then it's gonna be my regular content, just a lot more. So you can expect some more book videos during this time. Maybe some festive reading vlogs, maybe a couple concert vlogs. I know we're going to at least one this year. I really want this month to be focused on enjoying each day individually, because I love this time of year. But before we get into the month of December, we have to do some wrapping up. A very long intro. Welcome to my October and November book wrap-up. I did want to do these separately just because I was hyping up October spooky season so much, but then it just wasn't a good reading month for me at all. I didn't really have anything to say about the books that I was reading, and the same thing can kind of be said of November, just because in the past week or so I did end up getting sick, so I wasn't really reading that much. And also I'm currently taking finals for my classes. My last assignment is actually due tomorrow, so I have 24 hours to do that, but I'm doing this instead. So I have a total of 9 books that we're going to be talking about that I read over the past 2 months. Some of them I don't even remember, honestly. It feels like so long ago, and then some of them are favorites of the year. I guess we'll just get into it. So the first book that I read in October, it's one that I had been trying to get through for a while, and I decided I needed to just get it over with so that I could get off of my stack of currently reading books. It's one that Kaylin recommended that I read because I'm always saying I don't know what to pick, I don't know what to read next, and they'll give me a book and I'll add it to the stack and then I'll keep saying I don't know what to read. I eventually forced myself to pick up The War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells. This book is about the end of the world. It's about some aliens that crash into Earth and just mess things up. I did force myself to read through this. I didn't really want to ever pick it up. I was never really invested. I do think it would be good as a movie, which I know there is one. We haven't seen it yet, but I feel like it would be better as a movie than a book. The language is definitely a little bit older, and that kind of put me off of it because my brain just was not willing to do all that work to get a story that I've heard 1,000 times. Because it's talking about the end of the world and running away from these aliens and seeing what people do when they're facing death. And I feel like it probably would have been cool when it first came out, maybe, but because we have talked about so many end of the world possibilities and so many technological advancements, and just, I feel like now this story is kind of tame. Like, I wanted it to be more graphic. I wanted it to be more end-of-the-world-y. It felt casual compared to what we have now. And that's not to say it was bad by any means. Like, it's definitely, it makes sense for the time that it was. And I think it still works for what it is, but it wasn't something that I was super interested in. The second book that I picked up during October was Tiny Nightmares, which is actually a collection of a lot of short stories. There's no one author. Every single time there's color on the pages, it's a new story from a new author. And I feel like this book is really, really good for if you're in a little bit of a reading slump, which I definitely was at the time, just because there's so many options, you know? You don't have to feel stressed at all about being stuck in a story that you don't really enjoy, because even if you decide to read through it, within 5 pages you're on to something else, so it doesn't feel like that big of a commitment. I like the idea of this, the idea that the authors have to so concisely share some of their deepest fears with the reader, and to do it in a way where that fear is kind of projected onto the person who's reading it. It's a very hard thing to do, especially without being too cliche, and I will say a lot of these authors did have similar themes. I tabbed a couple of my favorites. I think a big theme for a lot of these was just being alone, either waking up and realizing you're alone, or everybody leaving you, or the people around you don't relate to you in the way that you thought they did. Just all of these different variations where you're realizing your existence is solo. And of course things like breakups or death or everything like that. Some of my favorites are Jane Death Theory number 13. This was also a really good one, Carbon Footprint by Shelley Oria. You go to take the subway, but there are people that, to stop overpopulation, will push random people in front of the subway, and you're following somebody as they have to take the subway because it's the only way they can get around, but they're afraid that this is going to happen to them. I wrote that most of them are underwhelming and kind of forgettable, but honestly, there's nothing wrong with that with a book like this. It's very much just like a coffee table pick it up when you feel like reading one type of thing. And I think considering where I was at with reading during October, that's exactly what I needed. The third book that I read in October is You, which I'm sure we all know from the Netflix series, but it is also a book. I was a little wary going into this book just because I obviously know what the story is from seeing the show, and it's different to read it in a book versus hearing it from an actor, because you are still getting that first-person narration throughout the entire story. And honestly, Joe is a little bit insufferable when you have to read it all. Which I get is kind of the point, but it's just, I was cringing so hard. A little bit. But once you accept that that's the way that it is, that's the way that he thinks, and that's the way that the story is gonna go, it becomes a little bit more bearable. But I do wonder if I would enjoy this book as much if I hadn't watched the show first, just because the whole time I'm reading this, I am thinking it in the actor's narration voice, and I feel like that adds a lot to the story because I think the show is done really, really well. So I don't know how this would be if I was reading it just completely on its own. I do think reading about his constant thought can get a little bit boring, and the show gives just a little bit more context about some of the other characters and their experiences that makes it just a little bit more interesting. But it is impressive to have a book that is so thoroughly train of thought, where you're literally just following this one character's every thought for the entire story. And as always, I love a story where you have to root for the bad guy. Then the fourth one is one that I have been putting off reading for so long. Every time we went to the bookstore, I would look at it, I would pick it up, I would hold it in my hands, and then I would set it down and say, I'm not allowed to read this. Because in my head, it would be something that I could enjoy. And I didn't dare pick it up and read it and then find out that I don't like it as much as I think I would, because I wanted to be one of the people that enjoyed this author. Sally Rooney's Normal People. People have mixed opinion about this author because of the way that she writes. One big thing is she doesn't have quotation marks in the book. It's just fully text, and you kind of have to just get a feel for it as you go along, which I kind of like the ambiguity of it. I like the idea that you don't know for sure if the character is talking or if they're thinking until the conversation is being had, because there's little remarks that you can't tell for sure if they're saying it or not. I know this is a show. One of my friends said that the show is really good. Again, I haven't seen anything about that. If any of you have watched it, then convince me and maybe I'll watch it. But I did tab this book. I did enjoy it quite a bit, I'll be honest. I just realized I said all of that without looking at my notes, and then I went to read my notes, and that's exactly what I wrote. So clearly my feelings on this book have not changed. In this book, you're literally just watching two people exist. You're following Connell and Marianne. Connell is popular and well-liked, but his family is not very wealthy. They don't have a lot of things going for them outside of school. Whereas Marianne is not very popular in school. She's kind of nerdy and a bit of an outcast, but her family is wealthy. Connell's mom works for Marianne, and because of that, they start talking, and then things go from there. You just watch them hang out together. I feel like that description alone gives it kind of a Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow vibe, which I kind of feel like this book is the same as that. And you're watching them struggle either financially or creatively or with their mental health or whatever it may be. You're just watching them live life. I love books about bad people, and I love books where you're just existing with them. Same reason I love reading A Little Life. It's just so comforting to know that these simple experiences are so universal, that people around the world feel that they're important enough to write about. That is so special to me. And then I tabbed little moments in this book. I tabbed things that I related to either of the characters in green and blue, and then just a couple pink tabs for moments that were just cute between the two characters. I'll be honest, I don't think about this book. I don't remember this book, but I know that it's one that if I were to look into it, if I were to flip open to a tab that I have, I still relate to everything that I marked down, and I think that's kind of a good indicator of if I liked it or not. It's not even necessarily that I think about it, because there are so many books to think about all the time, right? But it's one of those things where it's just right book, right time. I related to these characters, and I cared about these characters, and I wanted to know more about them and the ways that they felt aligned with the ways that I felt while I was reading it, and it just all worked out. Marianne had the sense that her real life was happening somewhere very far away, happening without her, and she didn't know if she would ever find out where it was and become part of it. Here I am on the floor, he thought. Is life so much worse here than it would be on the bed, or even in a totally different location? No, life is exactly the same. Life is the thing you bring with you inside your own head. I might as well be lying here, breathing the vile dust on the carpet into my lungs, gradually feeling my right arm go numb under the weight of my body, because it's essentially the same thing as every other possible experience. You just watch them, and I love it. I feel like that book moved really slowly. I felt like I was with those characters for a really long time, even though I was less than 200 pages into the book. I just wanted to spend so much time with them. And that concludes everything that I read in October. It was only 4 books, and I felt really discouraged when I saw that, because that's not a typical reading month for me. I can get up to like 13 books in a month. But I just wasn't feeling it, and there's nothing wrong with that. You're allowed to have slower reading months. Life goes on. And life goes straight into November, with the first book being The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches. I was just looking for something fun. I was looking for something that I could maybe read before going to bed because I just wasn't fitting in reading any other time of the day. So I thought at the very least I can incorporate it here right before I go to sleep. It's just a nice, calm activity. It's the thing I've always gone to before I go to bed, you know? So why not go back to my roots and see if it does something good for me? And this was such a good book to do that with. It was such a fun time. I know it's not a great descriptor, but genuinely it was such a calming book to read. In this book, you're following a witch. And she is taught from a young age that witches cannot exist together because their forces will be too powerful. They can't be found out together. Their magic can't be contained if they're in groups. So they can only meet up a little bit. It has to be super regulated. And outside of that, they can't really have any contact with each other. She copes with this by being an online personality where she pretends to be a witch. And because witches don't exist, people online don't realize that she's really doing the things that she's doing. Except for one day, she gets a call from somebody that saw one of her videos. And they say, hey, we need your help here. So she goes to this really secluded house where 3 tiny little witch girls are all living there with some guardians who don't really know how to take care of witches, and they say, hey, we need your help. We don't know what to do with them. Can you teach them how to use their powers, basically? And from there, it's very much a found family story. You're watching them all learn to get along because she has never existed with other witches, and obviously they have never had to live with any real authority over their powers. And this book is great for diversity. It's got queer characters, it's got people of color, it's got, you know, it's got a range of characters. I appreciate that. A lot of people say that this book is the autumn equivalent of House in the Cerulean Sea, which apparently there's a whole other thing about that I just have not paid attention to at all because I always praise that book. We don't need to get into all of that, but this book has the same vibes in that it's this person who has lived alone for so long now learning how to live with all of these other younger people. Apparently, according to my notes, there's a bit of a Grumpy Sunshine romance. Unfortunately, I don't remember the romance at all in this story. I very much remember her experience with the kids. I don't remember her experience with anybody else in the house. That was not an important part for me. Which, if I'm not mistaken, this is the book that has a little bit of a spicy ending with that romance, and I felt like it was out of place because I feel like this book is for a younger audience, so that seemed strange to me. But again, that was just my own personal preference because I'm sure it made sense within the actual story, showing that they both opened up to each other or whatever. But if this is that book, I was a little bit put off by that scene. I feel like it was a little bit out of nowhere with how the story was going up until then. I wrote that it balances cozy fantasy with complex characters and genuine communication, and it's a good balance of that communication and the development of the characters with humor, and I fully understand the hype. It was comforting, but it does talk about real-world issues, and it was done so well. Then I read City of Ember, which this is another recommendation from Kaylin. I wrote that this is dystopian, but without the gore and the graphic trauma of 2010's YA favorites, such as Hunger Games, Divergent, all of those. But in this book, you're following 2 kids. They live in a city that is surrounded by darkness. In the introduction to this book, you find out that there is a chest that has the secret to get out whenever they're ready, but the chest got hidden away. People don't know it's there, so the city is kind of falling apart because people didn't know they were supposed to leave. And throughout this book, you're following the kids as they realize that there might be another option outside of this city that people are just not aware of. So you're following these kids just trying to escape the city. I feel like children's books are really good at drawing you in because that's kind of the point, right? They have to get kids involved without a lot of words. So it's always fun to read them, and it's fairly low stakes. You can kind of bet on your favorite characters making it through so that you have this bigger message for kids instead of traumatizing them from a young age because their favorite characters died. I'm looking at you, Rick Riordan. I felt like the whole time I was reading it, I had to have some deeper analysis of what the story meant. I just wanted to take a step back and enjoy the story, but I couldn't do that because I had to keep thinking about all the serious things and how real this story is. But at the end of the day, I did feel similarly to how I felt when I was reading Maze Runner, where I didn't want the story to progress because I wanted them to stay safe. Where I know that the situation they're in isn't ideal, but I'd almost rather they stay there than have to face the dangers that are outside. We've got 3 more books, the first one being Shark Heart, A Love Story by Emily Habeck. This is one of my Book of the Month books, and I've been putting off reading it for so long because I didn't even really remember what it was about. The summary says that it's about a couple that recently got married, and then the husband finds out he's going to turn into a great white shark, and you're kind of just following this relationship as this transformation happens. And I thought the entire book, it's kind of a thick book, I thought it was going to be entirely about his transformation and maybe from, I don't know whose point of view, from one of their point of views, just watching this whole thing happen and watching their relationship maybe either get stronger or completely fall apart. This book is split up into a couple of different sections. You get the perspectives of a lot of characters, honestly. You get not only the wife and the husband, but you also get a couple of other animal creatures along the way. Because this is basically our world that we live in, except sometimes people just turn into animals, and this is just a thing that occurs, and it can be genetic and can be passed down. It's just a thing that is accepted. Oh my goodness, it's December. I started recording this at 11:30. It's currently 12:09. Happy December. But I wrote that I got chills from the first pages, which is where you get to see that they're getting married, because you can feel how much they love each other. They know each other, that they care about each other, that they want to be together. And I feel like I was immediately drawn into the relationship, so I was immediately devastated when I received the news with them that one of them is going to become a shark. And I could also relate to them and their dynamic and how they balance and also counter each other, how one of them is very organized and very serious and then the other one is kind of a bit more carefree. The different roles that they have in this relationship, I just feel like I could see myself in that a lot, which made it all the more heartbreaking. And at its core, this book is about watching somebody lose their humanity and what it means to be human, because this transformation takes time. It's both physical and mental. You first watch them physically transform, losing all their human traits, but you also have to watch them mentally spacing out and becoming more animalistic. And at what point do they switch from being human, where they can live with you, to, okay, now we have to lock you up, or now we have to release you, or now we have to do whatever the next step is, obviously depending on the animal. So it's really just walking on that line, and how long can you stay together before you have to be separated, because it's the only way that you can exist. And I wrote that this is the second book in a row that sort of reminds you to appreciate what you have while you have it, because same with City of Ember, it's very much just like, enjoy the little things. And I wrote that the multiple perspectives add so much because they isolate the reader in the initial stages, where you're first learning about the illness and you're first watching it all take place, but then it also kind of humanizes the animals because you get to see a little bit from their perspectives, maybe after the transformations. I read this book within, I want to say 24 or 48 hours. I read through it really, really fast. I did not want to put it down. I think this was done really well, and I'm really excited to see whatever the author puts out next, because I'm fairly certain this is a debut novel. The Sun and the Star by Rick Riordan. I've said it so many times on this channel by now. I was a big Percy Jackson kid growing up, so this book was very much nostalgic, because Nico was, of course, my favorite character, so to get a whole book dedicated to him was very special, but I didn't really understand a lot of what was happening just because I read the series so long ago that all of the references went completely over my head. But I do think that writing a book like this is a good way to continue developing the world without it feeling overdone, just because it is a completely different character's perspective. It's just kind of a side quest type of thing where you still have the Percy Jackson series, which will always be the primary series of this whole world. That's what it's all built on. But you can branch out like this without it feeling too forced and too money grabby. I don't know if you can say the same about the new Percy Jackson books that are coming out, but that, you know. I don't even really know how to summarize the plot of this book, because you kind of either know these characters and want to read it, or don't know and won't really be interested. But if you are one of the people that was looking to pick this up, I do think that it was really nice to get to visit these characters and to get to be in these settings again. It felt very much like coming home. And then the last book that I read is actually one that I don't want to talk too much about in this video, just because I do plan on putting out a whole other video in a couple of days talking about my whole experience, but The Ballot of Songbirds and Snakes by Suzanne Collins. I started reading this book in mid-November because the movie came out on the 17th or 18th. This book is a prequel to the Hunger Games series. You're following Snow as a young adult, fresh into the world of the games. You're learning his involvement with the games and how he progressed to become such a villain. Again, villain story. We love rooting for the bad guys. And I was really curious how Suzanne was gonna do it in this book, just because he's so evil in the Hunger Games. This book is split up into 3 different sections. So there's kind of a time before the games, during the games, and then after, and you're following Snow, again, through his involvement with all of it. Also his best buddy, Lucy Gray, who is a lady from District 12. I don't even know how much I can say about this book without it sounding spoilery. I mean, the whole book is really just about watching and trying to find out, where did things go so wrong? I don't know what anybody else has said about it. I haven't really watched anything because I wanted to get my own experience first. I don't know. Like I said, I'm putting out a whole video on this book in a couple of days. Again, I really enjoyed this book, and the last line, so good. So good. But that wraps up my wrap-up for October and November. I hope this is a good reading month for me. I don't know how I'm gonna balance making videos and reading books and consuming content and doing fun things. Like, I don't know what the balance is gonna be, but I'm hoping to at least read some festive books, maybe some Christmas time books. I don't know that I have before. It's the end of the video. You know what to do. Everything's in the description. I'll see you probably tomorrow. Bye.